What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of In Another Thing with me, your host, Shalako. And today on In Another Thing, we sit down with director One9, one of the voices reshaping how documentaries are made and understood. We talk about his journey, why documentaries have become such a powerful and fast growing art form, and how he approached telling Allen Iverson's story in a way we've never seen before. It's a deep, inspiring conversation about creativity, culture, and truth. So let's get into it. We are here today with our guest, our very special guest, Mr. One9, or just One9 as he goes. I want to, first of all, full disclosure, I've known this man for very long time. I ain't gonna really say the years, but you already see the gray hair, so you know the years are kind of long here. But I'm known for a very long time, so I want to appreciate. First of all, I want to thank you, and I appreciate you for joining me. And we definitely want to talk about the Allen Iverson documentary, that great Allen Iverson documentary.
I appreciate
We're
it.
going to definitely dive into that. But first, before we even kind of go there, I want to I want to know more about One9. I want to know, like, for the listeners, for people who are going to kind of listen to this podcast, like, we want to talk about you first. You know what I mean? So I want to know, like, how did your creative journey start? Like, what made you decide to kind of go this route
I,
where you are now?
I appreciate you and thank you, Shalako. I appreciate your podcast and what you do for the culture, man. And yeah, so for me, just getting started originally, I was an artist, man. I was a street artist, graffiti artist. I grew up in the DC area. Um, and I really learned the language of self-reliance. I think that really helped me in terms of not just my art, but in terms of creating things that I felt mattered. One of the first jobs I got was teaching the youth, and that was to do big, murals throughout the city in DC. And from that, I was part of the summer jobs program run through Marion Barry. So what I did, I bought spray paint and we did big messages, big pieces all over the city. And I saw the impact that it had in communities that, kids who came from all sorts of backgrounds could see and feel the power of just messaging
Mm-hmm.
and the power of just uplifting and creating something that they felt a part of their community. So that really became my backbone of how I really got into just understanding art and messages and impact. Long story short, there was a show called Rap City, and they did a story on one of the pieces that I was doing with the kids. And I went to pick up a copy of the tape, and basically they were looking at my sketches at the time and offered me a job. So I did get started initially on BT's Rap City show. I did wind up doing the logos, and from there I was like really interested in graphics and animation. So I wound up doing the show openings.
Okay.
And then from there understanding what editing was and what directing was. So I had the opportunity to produce some of the Rap City shows, and initially that's where I learned a bit about production. And I will say, at the time, working at that network allowed me the creativity to try things. And honestly, that became, the ability to have equipment, and then with the ability of me to understand messaging is where I really understood that the power of story could be elevated. So I had some friends at the time, Tuma Basa, who was at MTV, also
Tuma, yeah.
BT,
Mm-hmm.
and then a good friend of mine named Eric Parker, who was a music editor at Source Magazine and Vibe Magazine at that time. So we all at that around that era. I think it was around 20, maybe in the 2000s somewhere. We decided to make a film with Nas called Time Is Illmatic.
Right.
And we never made a movie before, never knew how to make a movie. And really at the time we're just figuring out ways to get it started. So this is more for the film aficionados, but at that time I didn't know anybody in the film world, but I saw a film come out, and the cinematographer's name was Bradford Young,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't know anything about him, but I just, I had some mutual contacts, and I decided to reach out to him and say, listen, here's a couple clips from something I'm doing with Nas. Would love to see if you would be interested in being the DP, or just, how can we get started? And he said, man, listen, I'm gonna take this to a friend of mine at the Ford Foundation. He's the director there. He directed Eyes on the Prize. His name was Orlando Bagwell,
Yeah.
and we took a look at what we had, and man, it's God willing, he just gave us a grant and said, listen, I could see a language that you're creating. Show me some scenes of what you're making, and we did. And he gave us an initial startup grant, and that led to becoming a full grant, which in 2014 became our first film called Nas Time Is Illmatic, and it opened up the Tribeca Film Festival, opened up the whole festival. Nas performed his album, and that really led to the start of my film career. Never made a movie before, and you knew me at that time, and I was just, I was cutting promos and, you know, figuring out, how to story tell. No one gave you a chance then, so I think one thing I learned was you had to take your own chances, your own risks, and I really appreciate Orlando Bagwell because in that cycle that he gave us a grant, he also gave um, Ava DuVernay her first grant as well. So we were the two, I guess, directors that he decided to take a chance on, and I guess the rest became her history, my history, and really appreciate Orlando for everything he's done, in film and culture and just upliftment, and also really understanding that really the power to create stories is also having the power to green light, and
Right.
that was really appreciated, and that's how I really got that started.
Okay. Well, let's just kind of like hop into it because first, Nas is, Time is Illmatic. It's it was shortlisted for an Oscar. And like you said, it opened up one of the largest film festivals right now in the country, Tribeca. So it wasn't just some little thing, you know what I mean? But I think one of the things that kind of really stood out for it, and what people kind of don't understand or see in the background, which was what we really going to talk about today, is the time it takes to even do these stories. You know what I mean? And then even more so than that, getting someone like Nas, talking to him and having him, be willing to tell his story. So talk a little bit about that. Like, you started out, you're already an artist. You're top
Right.
notch artist. You're not just you're not a street tagger, none of that. You're an artist. So as an artist, as someone who worked at, we'll name the network, BET, Black Entertainment Television, and you're creating all the promos, you're creating the vision for those guys. Like, how did you go from there to sitting down with Nas and saying, "Hey, we want to tell your story, and allow me to tell your story"? Because usually with documentaries, you pick a subject matter. From what
Yeah.
I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it could
Mm,
be something that you're passionate about, something that a story that you really want to tell, and of
mm.
course, Nas is the culture. You know what I
Right.
mean, and he is
Right.
hip hop. So how did you guys go to him and say, "Hey, we want to tell your story. Please allow us to tell your story"?
By doing it totally reckless, man. So I think, when you first get started, you don't really have an idea of how to get to people, and how to get people to trust you, especially when you've never made a film before. So we went about it completely DIY. Like the way we first started was we had a contact to Naz's father, Oludara, and um, we borrowed film cameras. I had that at the time. Again, deep dive into the film world. I had a GL1 camera. It was the small version of the XL1. If any film people remember this, it was like the basic, small handheld camera. My friend of mine borrowed the camera from the community center, and we went over to Oludara's house. And he just decided to give some guys a chance to talk about his life and raising Nasir Jones and Jungle and so forth. What that led to was a 4-hour interview. And initially, what we thought we had was the story of a father son relationship that went much deeper than hip hop. In a way, it really started unpeeling back the layers of family history and generational history, and two generations of Jones family. So from that, we started just doing our own interviews. We reached out to other producers like Pete Rock and Premiere, and we just did all of this out of our own pockets, right? And I think this is a life lesson I learned is if you want to make something happen, you have to take the chances to do things yourself. You can't rely on other people to give you handouts or even give you a chance. So you have to take your own chance. And so I edited, those pieces together, and we connected with Nas's manager. He had no idea who we were really, but just off the strength of a couple trailers, he said, "Let me take a look at it. Meet me for dinner." And he brought Nas to the dinner table, and we basically pitched him some ideas. What's funny is the only thing I really had to show him, other than what that teaser, was my graffiti art pieces that I've done teaching kids. And so I showed him this. I said, "Listen, I came up in the culture. I grew up listening to not just your music, but embedding it, visually on the wall. I used to actually listen to Illmatic while I was painting and teaching these kids."
Right.
And so I showed them that the connection of what this can do in terms of a story on the wall. I said, "If you give me this shot, I can do this in a film form. You just gotta trust me." And he's kind of like studying us, looking us over. He said, "Let me see what you can do." Didn't guarantee that he would be a part of this. But I basically took the grant money anyways. They assumed I had Nas. I said, "Yeah, yeah, of course I got them." Didn't
Right.
have them.
Right.
But what we did, we cut together maybe about 45 minutes to 50 minutes of a rough. And I called his manager, a different manager at that time, who was only like 20 something years old, Anthony Salah, just started managing him. And I said, "Please take a look at what we have. I think we have something pretty impactful." And he came and looked at it, and he wound up texting Nas, and he said, "Look, you got to come see what these guys are doing, and sometimes you got to get out of your own way." Meaning, like, don't judge it like until you see it. And so he wound up coming. He said he only had 20 minutes, but I showed him what became like a scene that we dug up in the New York Public Library. Of It was rare footage of his father playing music that he used to play in the household. And Nas says he hadn't heard that since he was like 6 years old.
Wow.
See, "Where'd you get that?" I said, "We have archives and archives of so much footage." And I showed him everything we collected. And he wound up staying 5 hours. And he wound up just looking at us, gave us a hug. He says, "You're creating art, and I'll be a part of this." So at that point on, we had his support, and we really, filmed it very quickly after that. It was 10 years in the making, honestly, like starting and stopping, starting to stop. And we didn't get Nas until like year 8 or 9,
Right.
somewhere in there. And then we finished at year 10 for the Tribeca Festival. But honestly, like that 10 years was, meeting you, working together, figuring out how to edit
Right.
promos and all those things. So along that 10-year period, I just was kept picking things up and trying things. It took us so long because we weren't locked in on it every day, and we
Right.
didn't know if we were even going to finish this. But that's really I think perseverance became a life lesson for me. It's like you have to persevere, you have to maintain the patience and maintain a vision on what you want the ultimate goal to be, and
Right.
just do it all yourself. There's going to be a part you can't continue any further without financial support, but at least you did everything you can to get it to a position where someone could see your vision.
Right.
And I think that became ultimately what I preach this to this day, is do all the groundwork yourself. And these are the days when you're like shooting, producing, editing, directing, controlling the budget. We even PA'd our own shoots. So it was like very small, probably like 3 to 5 person crew that we did everything ourselves. And then it came down to just me and Eric Parker at the end of it, because everybody else had taking other jobs, but it was just two people. And that was me and him at the end of the day, made pretty much an entire film on our own with a very minimal budget. But again, that was like they say you make your first film to make your next three, and that's what that became.
Okay. Which was actually really dope because I'm actually glad you even mentioned that. And so what people kind of like don't understand is that most documentaries, it's not a scripted project in a way where you could probably get that done in a year or maybe 2 years. Like most documentaries, you're in it for years, for multiple years,
Yeah.
at probably a minimum of five.
Yeah.
But how do you like maintain like just the creativity, or your creative stamina when you're working on something like you said that took you 10 years to get done? Like what motivated you, I guess, to keep going to get that
Yeah.
one?
I think, well, that became a luxury, your first one, because you're not under the guidelines of a network or anybody else speeding you up, right? You're doing it on your own pace. So I think what kept us going was I felt like we had something to offer, and I wanted to take a shot at it. at that time, documentaries, this is 2014, weren't specifically like docs in culturally based docs, hip hop, music based docs. I didn't see a ton that really reflected the culture that I knew that we grew up in, um, on a multi-layered perspective, like meaning that it wasn't one dimension, it wasn't one note. What we had, when we really in Time Is Illmatic, we the approach was we looked at the key songs on that album and how they related to different components in Nas's life. So New York State of Mind, we wanted to understand Queensbridge, the housing complex. How did this complex shape him? And where did it come from? How did it get built from LaGuardia? Like, what was the history of it? Life's a Bitch looked at the family structure, how the family was being torn apart or split apart, basically, and enabled Nas to become almost like the male of the household in a sense. The World Is Yours became more about freedom and individuality of expression, finding his voice. So each of these songs had a different theme that we wanted to explore, and I think this became our language. Myself and Eric really wanted to go beyond just the typical making of the music. You
Right.
know, there were shows at that time called Behind the Music. MTV had tons of music, bass shows. I think BT had All Access,
Right.
but this was something different. I wanted to make sure that this felt impactful and generational, more so timeless. I think I wanted to create something that gave the viewer a deep dive into the layering process of the family structure. And if you understand that, then you can understand how this prolific thinker became such a one of the groundbreaking lyricists of our time. But you understand the background of all of that. So I think that became our process.
Right.
And that's why we didn't rush it because we were figuring out what that language was. Now moving forward, and we can get into this. The second film, I got a call from John Singleton to come to LA to do a film called LA Burning. Now, we didn't have the luxury of 10 years. We didn't have the luxury of any of that. It was basically you have about 8, 9 months to complete a story of the 25-year anniversary of the riots, the Rodney King riots at that time, or they in LA they call it the rebellion. So
Okay.
totally different approach, but again, understand now from a master like John Singleton what his language is, what his inspirations are, and why he wanted to tell that story. So and that being our second film, I had to figure out how to do this in a very fast paced world. This is only my second full length project, and I'm
Right.
figuring out on the fly like how to make this happen. He really gave us a lot of support. More so from experience, speaking about, I don't want you to listen to network. I don't want you to listen to anybody else but the voice I called you guys here because you guys are hungry. You're doing it your way.
Right.
And that's what I respect, and I think he was like, make sure the voice of the community is amplified. Like these are the voices that don't get heard. And what you guys do is you go into the places that can get the real stories that the media never covered. He was totally anti-media for this. So he's like anti-media, really anti-network. And I appreciated that, to make sure that we felt grounded and supported to become like, storytellers. And I think that enabled me to like truly felt inspired by him. Rest in peace, John Singleton, man.
Yes,
Just a
definitely.
legend of our time. So
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. So, and I'm glad you even touched on that because I think that's the difference between a scripted film compared to like the documentary. You get to hear and really get you get to connect with a lot of voices that most people won't even get to pick up. So, going from like say Nas and it was a single, person and his life and things around his life that you could focus on, and then going from an event that shaped a lot of lives, you know what I mean? It shaped our country and in many
Mhm.
ways. For most filmmakers, it's a heavy transition. So, and I'm pretty sure the success of Thomas Illmatic really kind of also got to John's attention, which led you guys to that as well.
Mhm.
So now for you, you're into film too. Like at what point did you decide, okay, this is where I'm going to live? The like documentaries, this is the type of storyteller that I want to be. Um, this is about, being an observer, being an educator. Like what point did you say, all right, this is it. This is where I'm going. I'm going to stick with this.
And it's a good question because I did not know that was my path. I didn't go to film school, and I didn't study film structure, or I'm an avid lover of films. I watch everything. I mean, everything, docs, scripted, experimental pieces. Skateboard docs. I came up in when media was very expressive, like you could try things. So I didn't know this was a career, to be honest with you. And I'll give you some. It's a little bit more like succinct. It's after the first film, Time Is Illmatic. I didn't realize I didn't have an agent. I didn't realize how to make this a career. So after that tour, we did a film tour with overseas. I didn't have work lined up, and I quit all my full-time jobs. So I was actually out of work for a great period of time. I'd say like 6 months or so, figuring out what it is I want to do. I go back to corporate world editing and this sort of thing, or after LA burning, I was like, all right, well, I gotta make a decision because this could be lucrative. So, and I will say, LA Burning got us an Emmy nomination, so it started to really buzz in the industry. There were 6 films on the LA riots at that time, all came out around the same time, but this is the one that was nominated. I was extremely like satisfied that people saw the power of storytelling, and we were figuring out. At that point, I think John Singleton's manager said, "You need representation.
Right.
Either I can manage you, but let me introduce you to an agent and get you off the ground." So that at that time there was an agency called ICM. There's three big ones with CA, William Morris, and the smallest one was ICM. So I went with ICM because they took my calls.
Right.
They were hungry.
Yeah.
And the guy. I mean, I spoke to a lot of them. CAA was not really. They're like, look, man, you need a huge track record
Yeah.
and this, that, and that. You need to bring in real money, mostly scripted. William Morris, just same type of deal. It's like, but the guy at ICM picked the phone up all the time, and he was hungry. He was young, and I liked that. And so yeah, he became my agent. He's the first thing he did was like, let me introduce you. Let me get your name. Your name is starting to get out there. Let me get you out there in front of all these networks. So he set up all these meetings, and that really helped because without that support, people don't know it. This whole thing is networking, man. To be honest with
Yeah.
you, it's like people have to see your work. They have to know you can do it, and then they have to know who you are and want to work with you. So, from that, you know, years later, ICM got bought out by CAA. Now I'm on CAA. Honestly, like a lot of what I do, anyways, is I find my own work.
Right.
And they're just a support system. They're great and really great at what they do, help you close deals and introduce you to circles that you may not be privy to. I knew that at that point, really after LA burning, that this could be a career.
Okay.
And then calls were started happening anyways around that time. I got a call from Alex Gibney at a company called Jigsaw, and they said, "Hey, do you want to team up with Questlove and his company to create a series called Songs That Shook?" At that time, it was called something else, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't feel right to me, the title they had and the direction. So at that point, I started to feel like I started to have a voice, and I
Right.
and I started to implement like what I felt I could bring to the table and not rely just on what's being given to you. And then
Right.
now you have to understand that you have a presence, you have a voice, and more importantly, you have a purpose. And I think the purpose is what was driving me. Now I had a language. I was like, I'm going to represent films that uplift the culture. I'm going to represent films that I'm gonna become a storyteller of identity, how people change, how
Right.
they endure, and ultimately how they disrupt. And I started developing that early language with LA Burning. And then that became something that I started having the belief in and started to take it from there.
So it's almost like I guess kind of like your style, I guess you can say. So let me hold on. Let me go through this here. So we got Nas, Time Is Illmatic, LA Burning, the riots 25 years later. You did looks like a PBS documentary examining race in America called The Talk. Songs That Shook America. One piece that you did that I was actually kind of surprised at. I was really interested in because I'm a kind of old school. I worked in news a lot of
Oh,
years,
okay.
and then you did the piece on Dan Rather, which I thought was pretty was pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Thank you. I just for clarity, I started that as a director, and it went through some iterations, and I stayed on as an executive producer, because I was getting there's a lot of calls. I started a project with Nipsey Hussle
Hmm.
at that time, and they were in good hands with Frank Marshall, so that became that iteration. But yeah, I sat in the office with Dan Rather, talked to him for about 3 hours with a journalist who worked with him, Jessica Sharif, and the two of us were very instrumental in getting that project off the ground. And very, it's an imposing figure when you're talking to somebody who's been all around the world and spoken to world leaders and presidents and really the history of journalism, to speak about why you're the one to make this film. So I loved it, man. I learned a lot. I grew up, watching him, and just helping to get that off the ground was amazing process.
All right. So it was a great film. But we also want to talk about Allen Iverson. That's what I really would like to talk about because I'm gonna tell you, as you can see, I'm a Baltimore guy. So,
Yeah.
the whole DMV area. So of course I grew up. I knew about Iverson. I knew where he played the whole deal. And me being not the tallest guy on a basketball court, I could relate to this guy because he wasn't that tall, but he was really that good. And that's the only thing I could relate to because I was not good at basketball. Am not good at basketball. So I ain't even gonna put that out there. But I also understood that, he from the beginning, like Iverson was going to be a game changer. Now full disclosure for me too. Of course, I was a Kobe guy. I was always a Kobe guy, so I was kind of like, he's coming, but Kobe's here, Kobe's here, Kobe's here.
Right.
And then you start to watch him, and then you start to not only watch him, you kind of like you follow him, you try to understand him, and then I grew up in the inner city of Baltimore, and I like, and I won't say I know guys like him. I just know guys who've had his struggle, his experience, those type of things. How did Allen Iverson, like, how did that project come to you? Because whenever you mention his name, you know, people
Hmm.
perk up. People want to hear about him. People want to know what he's doing. People want to know his story, all of these things. So, how did you guys get the Allen Iverson project?
So the Allen Iverson project initially started with the concepts with two production companies, Unanimous Studios, with that's owned by Steph Curry, and Authentic Brand Group with Shaquille O'Neal. So the two icons of ball decided that we want to tell the story on and the real story on Allen Iverson. Allen had just signed with Authentic Brand, so they were looking at ways to. They asked him what he wanted to do first, and he said, "I want to tell my own documentary. I want to get my own voice out there. How do we make it happen?" So they brought it to Amazon. Amazon loved the idea, and then he said, "Who's directing it?" And so that's when calls went out, and it was, I think, initially like 20 to 25, 30 directors attached and interviewed and so forth. They spoke to me and they said, we'd love for you to, if you're interested, to put together some concept. So I literally, like, when I heard the name, grew up off watching Allen Iverson and, from the Georgetown era all the way up. And, but I was decided, you know what, I have an idea, and but I'm not gonna pitch this in the traditional sense. I wanted to know, and this is like as simple as it can be. I was like, I wanted to know where his heart came from,
Right.
where that motor comes from, but also just that undeniable um just ability to be himself. Like I
Right.
wanted to know that. Basically, that became the impetus of what I wanted to say to him.
Mhm.
I mean, everybody has their pitch. He's on calls with all these people. I went the other way. I was like, look, man, I didn't go to film school. I didn't do this. And I said, you know what? Like, you gave everybody a gift in terms of like what you brought to the game. Um, I want to give a gift back to you. This is a thank you.
All
But
right.
in order for me to do that, what I need from you is two things. I need you, what you brought to the game, the ability to just go full throttle, undeniable, raw, relentless, authentic, and just be in your side. If you're able to give that to me on camera and without any hesitations, any doubts, anything, we're gonna make something epic. I said, two, if you can give me access to those, the key people around you, your family, we need to hear from them. Because in my mind, like, you really want to know where that heart came from. You got to
Right.
understand who the ones that brought them up. And so that became, our kind of bond. And I said, look, man, I'm not like, I'm sure I don't know who the other people were on the call. I do know, but I don't want to put their names
Yeah,
out
yeah,
there.
of course, of
But
course.
they're big. They're
Yeah.
really big, like big, big. And I would just say, like, I'm not them, like I'm not gonna, like, if you do this, I'm gonna do this day and night, and I'm gonna live this. And this is like the way you dove for loose balls, the way we're diving all over the place to make this film the best it can be, and it's just all heart. And the other thing is, like, I didn't fanboy out. I'm not like I do this with everybody. I just got ultimate respect for who you are, but we're just gonna talk one to one. Like, we're not gonna talk like I'm an ultra fan or this, because I'm not gonna. I don't do that. I don't come off like that, anyways. So I just felt like, hey, we could just build like on a real relationship. Like, most of the film is going to be done off camera. Like, I need to understand this. We have to have a trust and a bond level. So he's like, man, come on out to where I'm at. Let's have lunch. And so I flew down to Charlotte. We had like a 3 hour lunch, and the rest was like, man, you the one, man. Let's make it happen. I was like, wow, okay, this is real then. So, but it people don't know that took like 6 months
Right.
just to get those conversations off the ground. And in those 6 months, if people don't know this, is like, you can't take other work. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, I can't
Okay.
take another film.
Right.
I'm like, wait, I'm talking about Iverson, but I'm talking to my agent. I was like, is this real? Like, what do you think? He's like, yeah, I mean, so far so good. Just keep going with it. But I'm like, it's been like 4 months, man.
Right.
Like, I gotta work. You know what I mean? Like, what we doing? And he's like, man, just we're close. Like, they're thinking about locking in soon, and that became 6 months. And I was like, okay. But so that got started with just us conversations, and then the other thing was, like, he doesn't always show up, and that was a hard thing. So the first first interview, I'm like flying the crew. We're having a whole location. I mean, this is in his neighborhood. We flew where he lives, right? First week, he had something comes up, right, with his family, and he couldn't make it. I was like, man, this is how it's it'd be frustrating. So you don't
Right.
know what you're getting into, but we interviewed other people around him. So that first week was a wash. A lot of money went into like equipment, everything. We didn't get everything we needed, and network getting a little like cold feet now. They're like, hey, are you going to be able to get them? And it's not me. I'm like, oh
Right.
yeah, for sure. But when we did interview him, it was just became something so raw and real. And I remember this. He don't know this, but like, we sat and did like a 3 hour interview, and his mic is still on, right? And
Yeah.
I can hear it. And it's like he's talking to his boy. He's like, yeah, I needed a deposit. I wasn't gonna just get some fucked up, questions that I always seem to get, and I
Right.
just got it. He's like, yeah, we can do this now. And like, I'm hearing this, I'm like, yes. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah. I was like, so now, because he said I'm gonna come. He said I'm coming at him, and he says I wanted that. I never seen anybody actually never take a break. You know what I mean? You sit down with people and they're like, let me get some water. Let's take a break here. Then we had to take breaks, change cards and cameras. He didn't want to take a break. He's just like, let's keep going. Let's keep going. I'm
Right.
I'm in it.
Yeah.
And so, what that really led to was, even when we sat down with all his family members, he never left. Like, we rented a cultural center in Newport News. I did his second interview first. It was another 2 to 3 hour interview. I said, you can hang out in the basement, chill with your family, friends. I'm going to interview your father, your mother, everybody around, one at a time. But he comes up behind me doing some of these interviews, and it's like, I just want to hear my daddy talk. I was like, okay. I said, why don't you sit next to him? And that led to us kind of breaking the wall a little bit. We let cameras roll. And now we're having these kind of real candid conversations with him, his father, his sister, his mother was right behind me. And it became like really family, um, core conversations that I don't think they've had with each other. And
Right.
Alan's hearing stories for the first time. So if you watch the film, you see him getting emotional a lot. Like, these are stories that he's never heard and heard conveyed to him, because he's been flying all over the country. And I think it meant so much to him to sit and watch and hear his life story told from those who love him. And I'll say one thing is like when we did watch a rough cut together, it was all the Amazon execs, myself and him. And so me and Alan went to the back of the theater at Amazon's really nice theater, and we're watching it, and I'm like, man, it's gonna be like he's literally sitting right next to me, and I can hear him when he likes the scene. He puts his hand on my shoulder, and it's like he's like, I'm a bad motherfucker. And then
Right.
when it's heavy, I can hear him tearing up, man. I can hear
Yeah.
him snip, man. It was emotional, real emotional for him. But I know he loved it. He called his mother and his sister like after episode 2, and it was just going on how heavy this is, and it was powerful, man, for him. I mean, for Allen, it's there's very few athletes that really take the time and speak without a filter and don't have any sort of inhibitions about where they are in life. He was totally raw and honest, and that's why I think you get that in the film. You get something that is completely true. There's
And
nothing
you
he's holding
definitely
back
do.
from.
You definitely do. And that's why I even wanted to talk about, because the thing about Allen Iverson for us, for people on the other side, of course, was that he's kind of misunderstood, right?
Hmm.
And he kind of like, I remember, and I'm definitely going to butcher this quote, but I remember, I think it was Kobe Bryant was saying like, you guys are lucky that he's not 6'5" or something like that. You know what I mean? Because he
Yeah,
could be the
yeah.
greatest baller on the court, and then so even with what he did, like the basketball aside, the how he rep with his friends aside, and all of these things, the whole practice conversation, all of these things, like there's a era about him, there's an aura about him that people I think misunderstand. And
Hmm.
so how did you find, in other words, as a documentarian, because it's part of the documentary process, how did you find the story? Because I know, like with Nas, like you said, you started in one direction and then ended up in another. Like, but with Allen Iverson, and because it is an Amazon project, because they're going to want you to tell this story in 3 months instead of in 10. Like, how did you find that story and say, okay, this is what we're going to go with?
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because initially this was just supposed to be a feature, maybe between like 80, 90 minutes. And I knew once I got the first foundation interview with him and his mother that this can't just be that short. The foundation interviews of him and his mother. So that to me was like became the foundation of what I wanted to open up. It's like we've never heard his family actually speak on camera before in depth about their upbringing. And the key to this story is it's the theme for me is sacrifice and sacrifice for family throughout his whole career. So he understood that he couldn't do it alone, and they in turn refused to let him fall. No matter what he was going through early in life, he didn't. They came up beyond poor, right? He was number one player in football and basketball in high school, but he was also had to wear his sister's pants. His mother was living in a halfway house. He was juggling between places to live, and and to understand that, and how does he stay so grounded in a way that is focused, and because his core group, his core friends, would not let him fail. So his mother's sacrifice throughout this whole endeavor is really where I wanted to learn, where that came from. And
Right.
she's a fighter, and I think when you learn about who Alan was, you have to really understand, Miss Ann Iverson, and that became the foundation for this. And when we circle back from the beginning of the film all the way to the end, we found this really rare footage. It was Alan's first interview in 1996. He's a rookie, and that's what he has on, the brown hat. And it was kind of poignant because you see the innocence in
Right.
the young Alan coming of age before the media attacks, before the tats, before he understood anything. He was just someone that wanted the ball, and you could see the innocence in him. So I really wanted to use that as a foundation piece because you could see he's also very sharp and poignant and understands what it's all about. For him, it's family. It's a
Right.
sacrifice for family. So that became between the innocent young Alan and understanding the heavy weight of what his mother and the core Iversons have been through. I wanted to show that juxtaposition of how the media, how fame and fortune can tear you down and
Right.
rip you apart, because that is the misunderstood component that people really never really got to know. They understood that yes, he was defiant, and yes, he refused to 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 wear suits and have this kind of dress code put on him in a sense. And yes, he changed the game with the crossover and all these things, but all of those things came from his defiance. He was like in the film, he says, "I always felt Goliath, never David." And
Right.
that was the background that built him into never believing you were smaller than, never believing you're not a giant in this world. And that carried on through his life. He always felt authentic to who he was. And
Hmm.
that's the hardest thing, man, that to me is to be authentic and truthful to who you are over the course of your life. And I mean, think about how hard that is. Like realistic, like staying who you are, right?
Right.
Staying grounded to what you believe in. And because you have to acquiesce, so many people have jobs that they have to, change into something,
Hmm.
or what I mean? It's like how do you find your integrity? How do you find your belief in who you are? Part of the whole thing why I even kept One9, it was like part of a belief when I was just doing street art and graffiti, that was like I was free and independent just to create. When even though I said no matter what film I'm in or what network I'm talking to, they're gonna address me for that mentality of being free and independent. So I was like, I'm gonna make all these people call me that, like
Right.
because of the same mentality that Allen had of being himself. And that's who I became my identity as a creator. And I was like, you know what? That's just gonna be me. And it's always gonna be what I want to make. And that's what I loved about who Alan was. I think we were speaking about that. I remember one time because I would call him a lot and just fill him in on stuff. And one
Right.
time he was like, "Man, look, I know what you do, man. I've seen your films." He's like, "You're a killer, man. Just act like one." I
Right.
was like, really? I like that because I always felt that, but I was like, he just emboldened me to say, that's how I played. I never felt like when I'm going up against Kobe or Shaq or MJ, he's like, yeah, MJ is out on the court and that's my hero, but he's gonna know who number three is. You know what I
Right.
mean? He's gonna know me. And I love that
And he
self
did.
belief. Yeah, and he did. So that ability of finding your self belief is kind of what I wanted to look for in the film, and that stems from family, all
Yep.
of it.
And you brought up a good point because that was kind of going to be leading into my next question. Like, how how involved was AI in the telling of his story, and then does that create a challenge for you? Where you're, like I said, you're trying to go in one direction, and maybe he doesn't want to go in that direction, and you have to kind of get him there, or he wants to go somewhere where you might be thinking to yourself, like, is is not as interesting as perhaps he thinks it is. So how involved was he in the telling of this story and then in the process in itself?
And he basically answered everything I asked for him. I think I think the hardest parts, and I don't want to spoilers, but if it's episode 3 where we're talking about when he's retiring and he goes through his downfall. The hardest parts for him to deal with were talking about money, alcoholism, and divorce. I mean, so our calls, we had a lot of calls about this prior, and he was saying, how can I be? He says my brand is being imperfect. I understand that my brand is being authentically, flawed. And I would just go on and say, listen, if you can't speak about those things, you're not going to be truthful to what we, it's going to be hard, man. And it's like, especially talking about somebody's money, man. That's like that's all, that's taboo, man. You never never
Right.
talk about no man's money.
Yeah.
But it's not I'm not just putting it out there. These are things I've read, and again, I just wanted to know the truth. So what it really boiled down to was over the years, he's had all these friends that he brought up with him. So like in the film, they say he had about 30, 40 people on payroll, and he's constantly always provided for them. And that to his detriment is like, how do you say no? He didn't know how to say no up until recently in his life. And I think that was hard for him to figure out to speak on. Um, the one thing that he did say that I had to make sure, and I felt I totally agreed with, by the way. So we were like 90% done with the film. Matter of fact, we only had about 3 weeks left before we delivered the film. And the one person over the course of a year and a half who I could not get in the film was his wife.
Mm.
He had text me her number. He said, call her. She'll pick up, text her. I was like, Chuck, I'm calling, man. I'm texting. She don't answer. I was like, I can't get it. I said, matter of fact, you gotta help me, man. You gotta. And so over the course of this year, he said, listen, man, the film can't come out. It's not complete unless we get her. And so he finally did get her. And this was like maybe a week and a half before we were supposed to deliver. So
Wow.
not only had to hurry up and film. So the reason was she's very private. She's very shy. It's very
Right.
hard for her to speak on a lot of these things.
Right.
And so the way we had to set it up was I had to show her the whole film with Alan. So I
Right.
sat in a room with just Alan, his wife, and his kids. It was hard, man. Like, I mean, we had to go get boxes of tissues, and
Right.
it was coming out. So after that, like literally in the morning, we showed the film. It was around noon or so, and she says, "Okay, let me clear my face up and I'll do this interview with you." And it
Nice.
really became, she was outstanding in the film and felt complete. And it couldn't have been done without her. So that was the one thing that he was very adamant to make sure that she was in the film and we weren't putting it out without her. But we were trying from like day one. And it was just sometimes it is what it is, man. And when we talked earlier about scripted and docs, I would say this, like every film I do is an experiment. Like it's not the same as the previous film. It's because so many variables and things change that you have to think and be spontaneous all the time. You
Right.
have to roll with the punches. I don't even want to film the same way that I film one film to the other because I want it to feel fresh to me in a way. So yeah, it's challenging, man. Like it's a very difficult career path to do because things are changing very fast in terms of people's attention spans. Do people even have the attention spans to watch long form? I don't think so anymore. I mean, we're in the world we're in right now, you have to hit things very fast. So I'll get into a stylistic approach. So we overlapped a lot of audio voices.
Right.
Instead of long form conversations, we overlapped, and you're an editor, you know what it is. It's like you're basically truncating people's sentences to make sure they understand the point, but you're doing what could take 2 to 3 minutes into making it into 20 to 30 seconds.
Right.
So I had to keep people's attention spans going quickly and still letting it breathe. But like it's challenging, man, to stay, you have to stay relevant with the times. And
Well, that's
also,
right. That's your style, right? Because
yeah,
it's like it's
yeah,
not a Ken Burns style where
yeah,
you're taking 10 years to do a doc, and then
yeah,
people are talking these long kind of sound bites. It's more so like you got to grab them. Let's grab their attention now. Let's keep their attention.
yes,
On kind of like stay with us. You know what I mean? Because there's so many things. Whether it's I think even for these kids, not even I won't say kids, for people these days, period. You have so many distractions. Whether it's a TikTok, something happens on Instagram, or someone's going to Snapchat you. All these things. If you want to keep their attention, you got to kind of package it in a smaller or in a shorter
assist.
form. So
Yeah,
I definitely understand that. But I want to get to a couple of things real quick before I let you go. I have my friend of mine. He's a big Philly sports guy. My man John Brown. He has a podcast, Best in the World Sports, and Philadelphia sports. That world. Is to me is kind of a different world and how they treat not only their teams but their athletes. Like, what was the challenge for Allen? Because Allen, of course, he played with the 76ers. You have these icon 76ers players like the, Charles Barkley, the Moses Malones, all these guys. Like, how did he fit into that world of the Philly sports, and how did he decide, like, okay, I want to tell that side of it too? Because they could either love you forever, or they like, this guy is trash, we hate this guy. So clearly Allen's on the other side, like they love Allen, and it's a tough city to win over. Like,
yeah.
how did he feel like that he was able to do that?
Yeah, I think, and that's a good point because the Philly sports base is extremely tough. I mean, they will run you out of town, and but what I learned is he may be the most beloved athlete in Philadelphia history. I may be wrong with that, but maybe other than Rocky Balboa, but like in terms of what what he brought is heart and they toughness. and resilience. And I think those attributes define the Philly sports space. It's like they love the fact that he never his motor never stopped running, man, and he would go all out, um, to make sure that it was all about the win. Like they had the whole thing about practice and practice. He didn't it wasn't about practice for him. He practiced all the time to get to this level that he got to, right? It's just but showing up for the games was when it for him is what mattered the most. And I think they love the fact that he never quit on them. I think that's the hardest part and to win that over. But yeah, I think we spent time with some we addressed it, but I think ultimately what the hardest thing is how do you narrow down the scope of voices.
Right.
So one voice I had to get in this film, and it wasn't hard was harder than it was because of his schedule, with Stephen A. Smith. But I had to get him because he started his career the same year Allen started his rookie season,
Okay.
'96. So you see the growth of someone, and he made such eloquent points in the film about how do you judge this black man um off the court for what he is, but I have to, as a journalist, still drill him for everything on the court. So
Right.
he had this love, I wouldn't say it wasn't hate love, but he had this kind of dual relationship with him that Alan really trusted him. But these articles would come out and then they would get into to heated arguments. It would talk for almost like I think 8 months at a time.
Right.
So it was interesting to get Stephen A's perspective. And I really feel that he brought so much to the table in terms of deconstructing Allen the person. And so I told the Philadelphia sports lens through Stephen A.
Okay.
And I think that was how I approached it because he was all things Philly at that time, anyways. And again, he didn't, and we made it a point. There's um the white media and Stephen A perspective. So you can understand what I mean by that is people who didn't understand the cultural aspect of him of what he was bringing to the table at that time. So there was a great author, Larry Platt, another journalist,
Yeah.
who made that point. And I think and Larry's white, so he was there in the room, was there when there's 30 white guys with microphones pointing at this young black kid and then trying to understand what's happening in his world. It's a disconnect in a sense, and I think it's a lot different these days because you got to remember, like Allen came up during the time where hip hop was just exploding. The underground world of hip hop was coming into the mainstream, and this
Right.
was the era of Jay and Biggie and Nas and Wu Tang and Tupac, and in that era of uncompromising lyricists,
Right.
and Allen was represented that era. You know what I
Right.
mean? And that's why he's so beloved too, because just like hip hop, it wasn't compromising to anyone's standards. You got to come to it, and I think
Right.
that's he was embodiment of that. So I wanted to make sure that the Philly lens was told through Stephen A. And then Alan's lens was actually told through the people that were around him the most. That you can hear from. We made a point to hear from Rasan, his good friend, even though he was past at the time, but we profiled him to understand like he was the glue in his life, and his getting killed affected Alan tremendously, and that as a result that practice incident was part of all of that as well.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap this up. And like I said,
Yeah,
of
man.
course, once again, like, dude, I really, really appreciate you, really coming here and talking to me because, like I said, for me, um, I've never really worked on the documentary side of things. Like I've done television docs, whether at my time at like a Dateline NBC or at my time at the BET even. So, I know that like an actual documentary like this is a bigger process. It's definitely there's a there's a passion involved with it. Um there's just even wanting to be an educator, wanting to be someone who like you want to tell the story of someone's life more so than say, hey, I want to script this out. I want to keep as much in there as I can. I want people to understand where this guy is coming from. I want to know how Nas became Nas. I want to know how Allen became Allen. All of these
Mhm.
things. And so I think the audience, for the most part, because there aren't too many documentaries that are in theaters. You know what I mean? And,
Hmm.
you know, you get to sit at home and watch them. What, you know, maybe that should change even, because I feel like even probably more so or just as much as films, like they are culture changers and they're
Hmm.
educators. And so, you know, I really appreciate your style, and I've always appreciated your approach on, you know, who you want to talk to, and even more so, like, how do they relate to me? You know, not only even with me, like, say my son, you know, how, like, this as a young black man, or even just as a man, period, like, how does that work for me? You know, we, like, I lived through the riots, so, you know, how did that affect me? You know, how
Hmm.
did it affect them? You know, all of these things. So that's why I appreciate documentary filmmakers. And, like, so this
Yeah.
is kind of like, you know, start of my series. I'm trying to get our other good friend, Miss Tracy Carey, to come and speak to
Yes.
me, but, you know, Tracy's busy, you know, because
Yeah.
Tracy's dope. You know
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
mean? So I'm hoping she can make some time for me. But
Yeah.
just kind of to close out though, what is the final thing you want audiences to kind of understand when it comes to documentary filmmaking?
I think when it, for me personally, like when it comes to documentaries, I wanted people to know that I just don't document the past. I want people to know that you have to understand that the past can change the current generation, and you have to learn from history. So, you document the past, but you really understand, like, how does that shape today's generation, and how does it shape future generations. So I think it's always important to understand the why now, like why this matters now. And I think that's part of the way I go into every film is, my goal isn't just to document the past, but like to really just offer new ways for every generation to see itself in it, to see itself in the present, and really kind of just to remind itself what matters really most is how do you shape the future. So I think for me, it's understanding your purpose, right? What is your purpose? Because sometimes you may take on projects that don't really align with what you believe in. If it may be an Allen Iverson documentary, I want to understand something that's gonna. I'm totally believe, like, I love sacrifice for a higher cause. In this case, it was family. So I think, it's like you have to find what drives you, and then you're implementing that into it. Because if you really look at documentaries, they're a portrait of culture, right? Like you're an artist. I'm go back to my artist roots. Like I'm creating a portrait of this. This is my interpretation of it, but I'm also making sure it's truthful to what it is, right? So you have to make sure your voice is strong enough where they know this is a Shalako Gordon piece, this is a 1-9 piece, and it stands for something. Because other than that, like it'll fall into just this kind of elixir of like so much media content. Like, but what does it mean? You know what I
Right.
mean? It's just that to me is important, and why documentaries, they're really like part of historical context. It goes back to the African griot or Dharma. It's just you're telling truths of a culture, and you're uplifting it for another generation.
Right.
And to be honest with you, man, it's like you're one of one. Like you're one person that is selected to make this, and they trust you, so they have to believe in everything you believe in. And that's the hardest part, man, is staying truthful to your identity and making sure your voice matters.
Okay. Well, I like, once again, I appreciate that, and
Yeah,
I
man.
agree with you 100%. And
Yeah.
once again, I thank you, man. I thank you for joining me on in another thing.
Yeah.
And you know, as I go on, if there's something I would love to bring you back and talk to you more, because you have insight, you have been in this game, and the thing is, you know, yes, there's tons of successful filmmakers and directors who haven't gone to film school or whatever the case may be, because, you know, basically doing what you do is your school, it is your lesson, and you take other parts of your life and you approach it with that way, and then
Hmm.
you learn, and then you grow, and then there it is. Because you could have, I mean, let's just be real with it. You could have peaked at Nas, you know, Time Is Illmatic. That's a, you know, it was shortlisted for an Oscar, and like, oh, I'm the man. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do this. But you know, you studied, you changed, you did what you had to do to basically be able to tell your story. And I appreciate you for that. And I think the audience appreciates you for that. So I want to thank you for joining me once again. And you know, hopefully talk to you soon, man. Be well.
Thank you. Much respect. Much love.
All right,
Salute.
brother. Take it
All
easy.
right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.